The final rescue auction of the season was nearly over. In a small livestock barn tucked deep in the Colorado foothills, the last few attendees lingered, boots scuffing against straw-covered floors. Most of the dogs had already been taken home, tails wagging, papers signed. What remained was silence, and one cage pushed to the far edge of the barn. Inside it stood Bruno. He was a German shepherd, but barely recognizable. His ribs jutted through a patchy, sunken coat. One ear hung limp. A long scar ran across his flank. But his stance, rigid, alert, held a charge that warned people to keep their distance. He didn't bark. He didn't cower. He watched. Next and final animal, the auctioneer called out, tapping his clipboard. Male German shepherd, found tied behind an abandoned mill. Severely underweight, reactive, especially with men. Starting bid, $1. Bruno's ears twitched at the word man as a tall male volunteer stepped within a few feet of the cage. Bruno lunged hard. His snarl cracked the air, and the bars rattled with the impact. Gasps spread across the barn. That one nearly took a chunk out of someone. Someone whispered, "He's a liability." The auctioneer cleared his throat and waited. No one raised a hand. Until $1. Heads turned. Near the edge of the ring stood a girl, small and still, no more than 11. At her side was a woman, her mother, who laid a calm hand on her shoulder. "You sure, young lady?" the auctioneer asked, raising an eyebrow. The girl didn't blink. "Yes, I want him." A few chuckles. One scoffed. "She'll regret that." But the auctioneer shrugged. Sold, $1. And so the final bid went not to someone seeking a perfect dog, but to a girl who saw something broken and believed it still mattered. Ellie Carter was quiet by nature. At 11, she had already known loss. Her father had died when Ellie was 7, and though no one said it outright, she had never really spoken the same way since. She listened more than she talked. She noticed things others overlooked, like silence, like sadness. When she looked at Bruno, she didn't see danger. She saw pain. He wasn't baring his teeth to scare them. He was building a wall, just like she once had. Samantha, her mother, stood beside her, concern written across her face. As a part-time behaviorist, Samantha had seen troubled animals. But Bruno was different, wound-tight, on edge, unpredictable. Samantha glanced down. "Ellie, you know this won't be easy." Ellie's eyes didn't waver. "I know," she said softly. "And I also know he's hurt, and he's craving love, just like I was." The words landed between them like something sacred. For a moment, everything else faded. The whispers, the warnings, the weight of paperwork. Bruno, still inside his crate, lifted his head. His eyes met Ellie's. It wasn't a long stare, just a second, maybe 2. But something shifted in the space between them. He didn't see fear in her. He saw gentleness. He saw another wounded soul. He saw something he hadn't seen in a long, long time. Someone who wasn't afraid to see him. And inside that scarred, coiled body, something responded. Not trust, not yet, but a loosening, a breath, a tiny flicker of surrender. Ellie slowly lowered her hand toward the crate's bars. Samantha inhaled sharply, instinctively stepping forward, then froze. Because Bruno moved. Not fast, not aggressive, just forward. He pressed his head gently against Ellie's small hand. And in the hushed stillness of the barn, people watched with widened eyes, silent, stunned. "He's not mean," Ellie whispered. "He's just sad." Paperwork was signed quickly, but no one left in a hurry. People lingered by the barn entrance, stealing glances at the girl and the dog who had just rewritten the ending of an auction no one expected to matter. As Bruno's crate was wheeled toward the parking lot, he didn't growl again. He didn't bark or lunge, but his eyes never left Ellie. Samantha kept a careful pace, eyes flicking between her daughter and the animal who now belonged to them. She had spent years studying behavior, body language, microreactions, and Bruno's posture had changed, not by much, but just enough for her to know this wasn't nothing. He was still tense, still guarded, but something had shifted. "He's following her," she whispered to herself. Not the food, not the leash. Her. By the time they reached the SUV, Bruno hesitated. He sniffed the open space in the back, where they had removed the crate door and lined it with soft bedding. It was a space designed not to contain him, but to invite him. Still, he didn't move. Ellie didn't urge him. She simply crouched beside the car, staying low, her hands in her lap. No words, no commands, just presence. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Finally, Bruno stepped forward. His limbs moved stiffly, worn from months of tension and neglect. Each step revealed how thin he truly was, how much of him had been worn down, inside and out. His paws trembled slightly as he climbed in, not from fear, but from sheer exhaustion. It wasn't graceful. He ducked his head, moved slow, each paw a negotiation, but he entered. Ellie gently closed the hatch. She didn't smile, didn't cheer, just placed her palm against a window and whispered, "You won't be alone anymore." Behind them, a volunteer who had warned them earlier shook his head in disbelief. That dog's different already. Samantha looked at her daughter, then at the German shepherd now curled in the back. "Maybe," she said softly, because someone finally believed he could be. That drive home was quiet. No music, no words, only the sound of snow under tires and a dog's steady breath behind them. But it felt like something had begun. Their house sat on the edge of Quiet Road, a small farmhouse tucked between open fields and a line of pines. Peaceful, still. It was the kind of place meant for healing. But Bruno didn't know that yet. The first few days were fragile. He refused to eat if anyone was in the room. He didn't sleep, not really. He would lie down, but always with one eye half open, his ears twitching at every creak of the floor or flicker of shadow. Even gentle noises, water running, a door hinge, made him flinch. He barely moved from the corner they had made for him, a crate without a door, surrounded by soft blankets, tucked beside the fireplace. A safe space, but not yet a trusted one. Samantha tried to stay distant, but every time she walked through the room, Bruno would tense. Sometimes growl wasn't rage. It was memory of hands too strong, of voices too loud. Dark clothing seemed to make it worse. Ellie noticed, so she began to tiptoe through the mornings, placing Bruno's food gently by his crate, then backing away. Beside each bowl, she left a little note, drawings of trees, suns, hearts. "So he knows he's not alone," she told her mother. She didn't try to pet him, didn't call his name. TJ just sat sometimes, cross-legged on the other side of the room, scribbling in her sketch pad, humming under her breath. Bruno never looked directly at her, but he didn't turn away either. And in a house full of quiet, that was something. Each evening, Samantha watched him from the kitchen doorway. No words passed between girl and dog, just time and stillness. And slowly, very slowly, Bruno began to eat while they stayed in the room. Not close, but close enough. By the end of the second week, Bruno had begun to shed the weight of fear. The growls had faded. The tension in his shoulders loosened. His eyes still scanned every room before entering, but they no longer held the wild, cornered look of something waiting to be hurt. He had begun to exist, not just survive. He would now eat with them nearby. He even lay within a few feet of Ellie when she sketched, his ears flicking at the sound of pencil on paper, but never moving away. Trust was blooming in silence. Then one evening, something subtle but extraordinary happened. The fire crackled softly in the living room. Samantha read a book under warm light. Upstairs, Ellie had just settled in for the night. Bruno stood up from his blanket. He didn't pace like he once did. He walked slowly toward the back of the house, paused at the door, then circled once, uncertain. Samantha didn't move. A quiet sound on the stairs. Ellie descending. She didn't speak. She simply walked to the back door and opened it gently, sitting beside it with her knees pulled to her chest. Bruno turned to her. Their eyes met briefly. Something passed between them. Too quiet for words. And then, for the first time, Bruno walked out into the night, not driven by panic, but drawn by calm. The air outside was cold, and the sky hung quietly above him, scattered with stars. Bruno stepped onto grass and paused, his breath visible in the chill. In that stillness, something long buried stirred deep within. A faint echo of belonging, a half-remembered feeling of once being safe, of having been loved. For a moment, The night wrapped around him like a memory. Then came something else, subtle but undeniable. That same feeling, no longer from the past, but alive in the present. This time, it came not from a distant place, but from behind him, from the girl and the woman who had waited without forcing, without fear. It was love again. Only now it was steady. It was warm. It was real. Moonlight poured across the yard as he wandered, nose to the breeze. Ellie stayed seated, unmoving. Minutes later, Bruno returned to the doorway. He didn't look unsure. He didn't hesitate. He stepped back inside. Ellie smiled just barely. "He's learning that needing someone isn't weakness," she whispered. And in that moment, under a quiet roof, trust didn't come in thunder. It came in a step. It happened on a wind-stirred Saturday. The house creaked as gusts brushed the windows. Ellie sat on the living room rug, coloring a picture of Bruno beneath a snowy tree. Samantha hummed softly in the kitchen, the scent of roasted carrots and rosemary filling the air. Bruno lay near the front door, not sleeping but resting. Then, gravel crunching. A delivery truck pulled into the long dirt drive, tires crackling like dry leaves. Bruno's ears twitched. Ellie paused her coloring. 3 sharp knocks. The sound hit like a gunshot in Bruno's mind. He was on his feet before anyone could blink. Body tense, teeth bared, hackles high. A deep, guttural growl rumbled through his chest. The door handle turned. The man outside stepped forward, and Bruno lost control. The old fear, the pain, the instinct to survive, they surged back all at once. He lunged toward the door with force, snarling, barking, ready to attack the shadow on the other side. The delivery man stumbled back, eyes wide in panic. Across the room, Ellie froze. In that moment, something inside her cracked. She could feel it, like watching the trust she had tried so hard to build crumble in front of her. The love she poured into Bruno, the hope she clung to, it all felt like it was slipping away. Her throat tightened. "Bruno," she whispered, her voice barely holding. "Please don't. Please." He frowned. His body trembled. The growl faded but lingered in his throat. He turned slowly. Ellie stood a few feet behind him, her hands slightly raised, not in command, but in plea. Her eyes met his, full of sadness, not fear. A quiet disappointment lived there too. And something else hurt. Bruno's breath hitched. He stepped back from the door. Then he turned fully and walked toward Ellie, slow and unsure. His head lowered, his tail, no longer raised, swayed gently. He stopped at her feet, pressed his nose against her hand, then rested his head against her knee. Ellie said nothing. She didn't move. She simply let him stay. And in that silence, Bruno found something stronger than fear. Forgiveness. The snow had fallen overnight, like a lullaby, slow, gentle, and complete. By morning, the world outside the farmhouse was silent and white. Trees stood bowed in reverence beneath the weight. Fence posts wore soft crowns of frost. The air held that particular hush only winter knows. Ellie had caught a cold the day before and stayed home, bundled beneath quilts, cheeks flushed, sketchpad resting on her knees. Samantha kissed her forehead and whispered, "We won't be long." It was just her and Bruno that morning, just the two of them alone in the hush of a sleeping forest. They walked the trail slowly. Bruno's paws crunched softly in the snow, his breath rising in little puffs. For a while it was peaceful, easy. Samantha even smiled as she unclipped the leash, let him roam free for a moment. Then he stopped. Bruno's body turned to stone, his head lifted, ears high, and his nose sharply into the wind. Something was wrong. In the next heartbeat, he was gone, sprinting into the trees, silent as a shadow. "Brun." Samantha called after him, heart leaping into her throat. She ran. Branches whipped her face. Her boots slipped on roots hidden beneath snow. And then she heard it, a bark, violent, urgent, repeating. Her chest tightened. The sound was raw, wild. For a terrible moment, she was back at the shelter, back to snarls and cages, back to the warning signs. She stumbled into a clearing and froze. Bruno was there, facing a shape in the snow, not attacking, alerting. A young man lay collapsed in the drift, lips blue, one leg twisted horribly. He was barely breathing. And Bruno was standing over him, barking, warning, calling for help. Tears welled in Samantha's eyes as she dropped to the man's side, her hands already dialing. Even when the rescue team arrived, strangers, Bruno didn't run. He didn't lash out. He stayed by her side. Later that night, as Samantha told the story by the fire, Ellie listened in silence. Then she looked down at her newest drawing, Bruno under a snowy pine, standing guard. He didn't just change, she whispered. A pause. He chose to. It had been months since Bruno came home, since the growling, the flinching, the silence, since that cold day when he first rested his head in Ellie's lap. And now the barn doors open again, not for an auction, but for something quieter, a gathering. Ellie had been invited back to the same place where she first saw him, where she had raised her hand for a dog no one wanted and paid just $1. The organizers were holding a community event on animal welfare and asked if the little girl with the quiet voice might be willing to share what came after. So here she was, standing just inside the same dusty barn. Samantha stood off to the side, watching as Ellie held Bruno's leash in one hand, a stack of her drawings in the other. Bruno walked beside her with ease. No pulling, no tension, only calm. People whispered when they saw him. "That's him," someone murmured. "The shepherd from the auction." Ellie walked to the front of the barn. Bruno sat at her feet. She looked out at the crowd, adults, children, families, then down at her sketch pad. "I didn't know how to fix him," she said quietly. "I just knew he was sad, and I was too." Her voice didn't waver. "Amy said he was dangerous, but I saw someone who was scared. I didn't want to change him. I wanted him to feel safe being exactly who he was." She held up a drawing. Bruno curled beneath a tree, eyes wide, anxious. "I drew this in the early days," she said, "when he didn't trust anyone, when every sound made him flinch. But even then, I knew he was trying." Bruno stretched out on the wooden floor, eyes half-lidded, body relaxed. From near the back, an older woman stood up. She had been there at that first auction, had watched Bruno snarl and tremble, and had warned Ellie not to waste her time. Now she stepped forward, voice low and rough. "I told her not to do it," the woman said. "I thought some dogs don't come back." She looked at Ellie, then at Bruno, but she didn't try to fix him. She gave him space and time. A long pause, and somehow he came back on his own. Bruno stirred slightly, shifting closer to Ellie's leg, but the barn was silent. Ellie didn't speak. She just smiled, small, steady, and let her hand rest gently on his back. And Bruno stayed, not because he was told, but because for the first time in his life, he didn't need to.